Welcome to the Art of Succession podcast with Barrett Young. Join us as we explore the strategies, stories, and insights that shape the journey of leadership transitions and business success. No matter where you find yourself along the journey, this is the podcast where you'll find the tools to make it happen.
As you've been listening to this guest, you're probably starting to ask your questions. How do I apply this to our own situation, our own succession story at the company that I'm working in now? At GWCPA, we have built a custom GPT that you can find linked down in the description below on our website. We have loaded this GPT up with all of our knowledge about public accounting and tax preparation around succession planning. We've also included the insights from the guests from the past 2 years of interviews at the Art of Succession. You can find all of that at the custom GPT. Use it any time of day. Start to apply it to your situation. Ask it the questions that are keeping you awake at night. I want to thank you for listening so far, and let's get back to the episode.
Welcome back to part 2 of my discussion with Jon Morris. If you want to watch part 1 of my discussion, where we talk about scaling his business to $40 million in revenue and his eventual exit from that company, you can find that linked right here. Otherwise, let's get back to our discussion. I mean, that's clearly you're an analytical person. You're setting goals. You're planning in June for next January. I love that that game day idea, the fresh balance or the fresh P&L concept there. You're right, though. Most business owners would be like, nope, this is great. Family needs me and I'm not needed at work, so I can just coast. I can just, collect the ownership, the rewards of being an owner here. How do you go from everything is awesome right now and my family needs me and I've got these other things I want to do, but you're not at a position where you're going to retire for the rest of your life? Or how do you go from that to, I want to start another company. I want to be a founder again.
So a few things happen, I think. First of all, my brother-in-law, who was the president of the company at Rise and eventually became the CEO of Rise. And by the way, I mean, just did an amazing job. Like he crushed it the next 6 years after I left. The one thing he says he's really disappointed in me is that I took 0 time off. I literally took like 3 weeks off and started Fiscal Advocate right away after selling Rise. And he's like, why didn't you do anything fun? And so a couple things. We're talking about April 2020, which is the beginning of the pandemic.
Right.
So first thing is, generally things that were fun at that moment in time involved a golf course or an airplane or, and I didn't have any of that at my disposal. So, but let's just say the world was totally open like it is today. I'm having a blast. And
This
that
is
was my
fun for me.
response. This is fun for me. I love my clients. I love my employees. I love innovating. Growing up, I played a lot of strategy games. I think this is the ultimate strategy game. It just never ends. When I go to bed at night, I'm still thinking about all the things I want to do and, ways to maneuver the business. I also feel the impact. I've had clients that were on the verge of bankruptcy that are now making millions of dollars in profits. I helped guide them through that. That's an amazing feeling. So I love what I do. I'm having fun. So that's how I got kind of into this right away.
So it was the vision for what's next that helped you exit then. There wasn't.
Actually, even though I started this 3 weeks after, it took 3 weeks of figuring out what I was going to do.
Oh, okay. So you didn't have this idea.
I didn't have a
coming out.
plan. I had a business coach that would every 3 months help me plan the next 3 months. And every 3 months for the last 3 years, he's like, Jon, the insights you guys have is like nothing I've ever seen. You could start a business just selling these insights. So I'm trying to think about what to do next. I'm an analytical mind, and I thought that would be fun. And so that's what I did.
So, okay, I want to tap into the knowledge here on the scaling of the business, because that's now what you do through Fiscal Advocate. So setting your KPIs, saying don't go below this, cash is king, all of that stuff. We hear that stuff so much, and it can be oppressive so much that we hear it all the time. Like, you have to hit your numbers, you have to have this put aside. How do you take a company from I'm near bankruptcy to positive $1 million in the bank, cash flow, all that kind of stuff? How do you break that down? What tips do you give them from your experience and working with your clients?
the first tip I give them is that this is a partnership and that I'm going to give you guidance. But if you don't follow that guidance, we're not going to be successful. And there's, especially when you're financially distressed, there's a lot of fear. People are calling you, begging for money. You're dealing with the stress of that. You're worried about making payroll. Uh, just you don't feel like successful. Like there's this feeling like I screwed my business up. Like there's all these things that go on, and the numbers are very clear. Like it's what's different about what I do is it's very similar to Rise. I get into granularity. I get down to like what you should be spending on your HR department. What should you be spending on your finance department? So that there's benchmark numbers of what you should spend. And, just to give you an example of the company I was just telling you about, they're a $10 million company. They were spending $1 million a year on their finance department. And, um, and they typically should be spending 5% of their revenue on their finance department. We got down even lower than that. And, they had these government contracts, and what they were being told was that these government contracts are so complex from the financial industry that, they need all these people to handle that work. So I dug in and I analyzed like the volume of transactions, and I analyzed like the systems they had to input in. And I was like, it really wasn't any more complex than anybody else. So we were able to reduce that substantially. Where I generally find the biggest problem is on the service side industry is that people are not servicing their customers profitably enough. So their gross margin is too low. The only way you can generally fix that is you go win a ton of new clients and you don't hire any more people, or you reduce your expenses.
Yeah.
And most people don't have just a massive pipeline just sitting around waiting for them. So you have to cut costs. And I've heard every excuse in the book about why they can't cut costs, why they're the unicorn and they're special at, and that, in their industry, they can operate at a lower percentage than another industry. And, if you're below a 40% gross margin in the service industry, you're most likely losing money. And so, the example I gave with, the person I was talking about, they listened and they were amazing partners and they executed and they were able to figure out how to deliver for their customers in the budget that I asked them to deliver for. They were willing to make the tough decisions and let go of people they care about. They were willing to restructure the finance department and get it under the right cost metrics. And I have other people who won't listen. And I equate it to the same thing as going to the doctor. How many times do you think doctors have given medical advice, to somebody and they just don't listen to the doctor?
I mean, for those listening that are not in service businesses, we're talking about payroll here when we're talking gross margin. And so you're either overloading or in your case, you're saying cutting unnecessary salary. Is it just a focus on timesheets? Is it a focus on this is what you need to,
So,
how would you recommend that for a business?
so you need to get more granular. So step one, uh, and I'm just going to talk about the service-based industry. I recognize that you have listeners, but this will apply to everything that anyone who's listening to this. Oftentimes, expenses come bundled. So typically, your payroll, whatever payroll provider you're doing, is going to have one line item on your income statement that just says payroll. And so the thing that you have to do is unbundle your payroll. And you have to move all the people that do client work to the client work bucket, and all the people that do sales to the sales bucket, and all the people who do marketing to the marketing bucket. And so by unbundling this, you're now able to learn how much you're spending versus what the benchmarks are. You can't do that until you unbundle it. So um, in a service-based company, 80% of your costs, though, are people, and they're people you love, and they're people you care about. And so when we went through this exercise, I don't remember the exact numbers because it was a few years ago, but their gross margin was probably like 20 to 30%. and we want their gross margin to be 50%. So that means that for every client they won, they were dedicating 70 to 80% of the revenue to working on the client as opposed to 50%, which is what they got. So that's the first thing is once you know this, then you have to go by line of business. So in the scenario that I'm talking about right now, there was a specific line where they actually had a negative gross margin. But they had no idea because they didn't unbundle it. Then when you figure out which group is the group that's not profitable, then from there you need to start looking at, well, why is it not profitable? One of the things that you want to look at is org structure. Most of the times you're having senior people do junior people work. So what you want to do is have a certain ratio. I generally recommend 4 direct reports for every manager at a minimum and a maximum of 7 direct reports to a manager. But you can start getting scale out of your manager where oftentimes you'll see people that only have 1 direct report per manager and they have 5 managers. It's like, well, you probably only need 1 manager with 5 direct reports. And those are the tricks that you can do to save costs. There's automation you can do, there's pricing issues, there's nearshoring, there's other elements you could do. But we know at least what the problem is, and then we keep on digging and getting more and more granular to understand where to improve.
How do you go from being a CEO of a $40 million company to being in the weeds again, other than it's exciting and that makes it fun for you? You had teams, you had so many things automated, you got to solve the problems you wanted to solve, to next starting over and the mindset shift necessary for that.
You know what? It actually wasn't a big transition. What I'd say though is there's certain things that I believe that were absolutely crucial that I spent money on in the early stages of this business. Eventually I took the cost out of the business. So I signed up for a bunch of SaaS systems that I had at Rise that I felt like was so necessary. And I slowly whittled that down to, just the core things that we need. But I do think it's very hard to transition from a larger company to a smaller company.
Yeah, I mean, what lessons did you say, "We're not gonna repeat this," or you just shared one that you said, "We have to have this," and then you realized you don't?
Well, it's funny at Rise in the early years, I had a saying. I don't think it's the best saying, but it was my saying, which is if you think you need it, you probably don't. And the idea was, I'll just give an example. I sponsored an event and everybody had, like a tablecloth over their table. And I was like, well, I got to go get a tablecloth. I was like, well, you know what? I found out that I could still win customers without the tablecloth. And I might look a little less professional, but you know, you start learning what are the crucial things that you need versus the things that you can get by on, bubble gum and duct tape in the beginning years.
Talk to me about the shift. I mean, you have a finance background, but what you weren't expecting when you get into the weeds on all these other businesses that you didn't necessarily encounter at Rise. Talk to me about that shift.
What I've learned in this new era, and it's really thinking about like my product roadmap or my service offering for the future, is I've come to the conclusion that I really don't think people want to be sophisticated in terms of how they run their business. I think what they want is to be slightly more sophisticated than they currently are and have it be easy. Sophisticated financial analysis is actually a lot of work. It is organizing data and structuring it and keeping it up to date and putting it all in the right systems. I don't think people realize that when they first get started. They're like, oh my God, this sounds amazing. But then they realize it's major change management. And so, what I think people really want is simple. How do I get the insights, but I don't have to do all the work that gets those insights? Or what are baby steps in insight? So that's, I would say, one of my key learnings is I thought that, the clients who are with me have been with me for years. They love the system and they're all in on the system. But it takes a special breed of company to really want that. And so I spent a lot of time, you know, in the vetting process, like when someone calls me, explaining what to expect. And, you know, and then the other one, as we talked about, is I see people who also are not willing to make the decisions. when it's like, right, I'll give an example of a client where I showed them all the data and I basically said, for every customer you win based on how much it costs to acquire that customer, you need to hold on to them for 2 years before you'll break even. And the analysis or the benchmark is that 1 year is the worst case scenario. We don't want to go beyond a year in holding a customer, and I really want to get you to 6 months or less. But they came up with excuses about how their industry is different and their business is different, and like it's and I was surprised by that. I was not expecting that.
Working in Rise, obviously in marketing for other companies, you're dealing with business owners, you're dealing with their goals and everything for their company. But now you're an analytical person, you love the finances of a business, and you're talking to people who do not love the finances of the business.
Yeah.
So how did you have to grow in that role? How did you have to shift your own thinking? Because you just said you've presented the information, it's black and white right in front of and they're
I would
making up reasons.
say I've said spending a lot more time in the vetting process of
Mm,
explaining what to expect, and I'm getting
before they become a client.
yeah, before they become a client. Where before I just was like, "Yeah, you wanna sign up? Let's get going," you know? And, and it's interesting, I'm about to win a new client, and it's gonna be an opposite problem with them. They are wildly profitable, but they spend no money on the business. And, convincing this person to take some risk, I think is gonna be the challenge in his scenario.
I mean, why should they take the risk if they're wildly profitable?
They're wildly profitable at the size of a founder-led company. So if they ever want to get larger beyond this person doing everything themselves, they won't be successful. And I'm very transparent about that. You know, I had 2 clients of mine, one that was $5 million dollars and wanted to get to $100 million in revenue, and one was $5 million dollars and never wanted to be larger than $6 million in revenue. And neither answer is wrong, but I'm probably a lot more valuable for the company that wants to go from 5 to 100 than the one that wants to go from 5 to 6. When I was talking to this, they're right now still a prospective client, I was very honest, like, "You got a great business, like, you're profitable." It was kinda like the question you asked me, "You're putting a lot of money away, like, you can just keep on doing what you're doing." I was like, "But if you wanted to get me involved, and you wanna go from where you currently are to a bigger number, to a bigger number, to a bigger number, I can help you do that, but you're also gonna have to invest in order to do that, meaning you're gonna have to give up some of that money to get you to the next level." And so we'll see what happens, but I was very transparent of, are you willing to do that? Can you do that? Don't hire me if I'm going to start making suggestions and you're like, you know what, at the end of the day, I'm just too scared to spend the money.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. Everybody has, "Oh, I'd love to double the size. I'd love to grow. I'd love to, that's my goal." And then you ask them why, and you're confronting them with the cost of that. A buddy of mine, his partner, her saying is always, "Do you want what that means? Like, this is what this means for your company. It means you can't pull out 100% of the profit every single year. It means you have to, like you said, go from 15% down to 5% because you're reinvesting it all." If we're not confronting them with that truth, then they're just gonna grow for the sake of growth. And
Yep.
you've shared some cases here. All of us have been in business for any amount of time know there's bad revenue out there
There
uh,
sure
that
is.
that we should stay away from. But if you're just growing for the sake of saying, "Yeah, I'm a $10 million company,"
Yeah.
it's like, cool, but what's your profit on that 10 million? So vetting process, again, coming down to you're the gatekeeper of the company. You control who comes in and who gets escorted out. Anything else that Fiscal Advocate has taught you that you maybe didn't realize fully was happening with you at Rise?
I think it goes back to the comment I had about the wind. You know, in my opinion, I've picked a fairly old, stodgy industry
I'm like, you went
with
from an A industry to a C industry.
yeah.
Yep,
I
fair
would put
enough.
it probably as a B industry. Like, it's not
Yeah.
collapsing. There's still lots of
Yeah.
people doing it, but there's no wind at their back. I do a ton of annual planning, and when I do the annual planning, everybody is like determining what their AI strategy is going to be for 2026. Nobody is like, what's my fractional CFO strategy going to be for 2026?
Right.
And so, I always thought it'd be fun to come in with sophistication and technology into, an older, stodgier industry. But I found that without the wind, it's just a lot harder to get the pipeline that you need to grow the business.
I mean, I joke about it, I love this industry. I absolutely love what we do, and I think it's way more exciting than we get credit for. But you're right, nobody's like, "Oh, man, if I double my outsourced CFO spend, then we can grow to be
We're gonna grow like
we're
crazy this year.
we're gonna grow." So how do you create the wind in that situation? And this goes back to that original question of if you are in a bad industry, you're not acquiring, or maybe you are. I know you've built a platform, right? Is that how you create the wind in a less than A situation?
So a couple things. One, I look at the services that are selling of our current offering. And the one thing that is consistently selling, which is not scalable, but it's the reality, is hiring me as an executive coach or advisor or strategic planner. I have a massive pipeline of opportunities in that area. And I fought it for the longest time because I want to be a CEO and not an executive coach. But I was like, you know what? The wind is blowing there. And let's not ignore that opportunity. So that's one thing where we did identify wind in a kind of windless industry. The second thing is, as we talked about AI, we just went into beta this week with an AI CFO Copilot. So this is connected to our budgeting and forecasting software, but you can also upload any of your financial data and any question that you have. Think of it as like ChatGPT, but substantially more accurate and with the ability to input your financial data, connect to our financial data systems, as well as we're going to be doing more and more connections. And I can't tell you if it's how well it's going to do, because I haven't gone to market yet. We're just going to market. But the idea that we chose to do it was because we know that that's where the wind is. We know that that's what people like. I firmly believe that the way that people do financial analysis today is going to be very different than tomorrow. And I think that this is a platform for the future. So that's us investing in the wind behind us. And I'm just going to give you, in my opinion, a fairly cool example. We have two entities, one in Colombia, one in the United States. And when we close the books, we have to do a consolidated statement. And it takes time for us to do it. So we went into our AI CFO Copilot tool called Luca. We uploaded two documents. They were both PDFs. And in seconds, they completely consolidated the report. But the best part about it was the number was different than the number we had when we consolidated it manually. And we consolidated it manually because we were testing to see if the tool would be accurate. So we're kind of frustrated and we're trying to be like, well, it was close, but it was still not 100% the same. Well, it turns out we made a mistake and it was 100% accurate and we were 99.9% accurate. So that was a proud moment for us because we are now able to do complex, time-consuming analysis at a faster rate and in a more accurate fashion.
I mean, it's a good point. I always, I'm on the valuation side of this profession, and I get people like, "What if people are using AI for their valuations? How are we going to put roadblocks? How are we going to put, parameters, boundaries around that and everything?" And my perspective is, how are you going to be a valuation advisor in 10 years that's not using AI? I mean, that borders on malpractice. That would be like somebody saying I'm hand filling out a 1040 or a partnership tax return with pen and paper still.
I'm still using typewriter. I
Yeah,
think the
you're
computer,
missing things because of your own biases, your own training, your own,
yeah.
just the way you've always done it. And I think it's going to be a monumental shift. Like you, I'm excited about the future here because I think I'm thinking more creatively and I'm catching things that I necessarily would have missed without
Yep.
it. So Yeah, awesome. John, I appreciate the time. I mean, this flew by
Yeah.
so fast, but we do need to wrap this one up. Before we jump into the lightning round and finish the episode, is there anything that I haven't asked about or anything that you wanted to add before we finish this up?
No, I think you've been incredibly thorough, and I hope the audience enjoyed it.
This just did come to mind because you've been through an exit already. Going into the second company, are you starting with the end in mind, or is it like
Okay,
this is
that actually is something I would love to talk about.
sure? Yeah,
I
let's dig into it.
highly recommend that when you start a company, you do not think of the end in mind.
Okay, interesting.
Um, so when I started Rise, I would tell people from the very beginning that I have a 20-year time horizon, and every year I added a year. And my exit strategy was I was going to die one day. I really believe that. Like I wasn't looking to sell the company. In this company, I have investors, and some of them are private equity, and I'll have to think of an exit for them someday, and I want to deliver a return for them. But I'm trying to build a great business, and that's the key message I want to get across. Focus on building an amazing business, and I promise you the exit will take care of yourself. If you can come up with ways to win customers and make it so that whatever you sold them, the experience of what they get after they bought it was better than what you sold them, you know, now you're talking about building something that's unique and special. And so I have a very long-term horizon on anything I start.
Interesting. Do you temper that a little bit? Because the flip side of that is I'm never going to leave this. I'm going to be here until I die. So we're just going to continue doing what's efficient, what's bringing in the money. You're very much not saying that. You're saying, no, you should optimize this thing and you should find the target client. You should serve them amazingly.
Yeah, I talked to you about game day. And, I talked to you about I do 6 months worth of planning for game day. I have 4 goals every year for my business. I have a revenue goal, a profit goal, a cash goal, and what I call is an infrastructure goal. And the infrastructure goal is really simple. All you have to do is answer one question. How is my business at the end of the year going to be better than it was at the beginning of the year? And you budget to make that real. That to me is the fun part. That's the innovation. That's coming up with AI CFO copilots. And I got a resource planning tool coming out. And I have all this incredible innovation because I'm making it so our business is better at the end of the year than it is at the beginning of the year. So I'm not suggesting that you do the same thing over and over and over again. I think that's how you become obsolete. And if you think about the story I told you why I left Rise, was because 2020 was the same as 2019. It didn't feel fun and special.
Yeah. Okay, good. So that's your personality. That's the goal setting and everything there. But yeah, for me, beginning
Yeah.
with the end in mind is the reminder, don't settle, continue to work your way out of lower level tasks. And I feel like that's the reminder a lot of business owners need when they're just like, no, I'm going to die here. I'm just going to
Yeah.
keep doing the same work
I
year
could
after
see
year.
how
But
like what I said puts it, my whole point is like if you think like I'm gonna sell in 5 years and you're focused on the exit,
Yeah.
I want you to be focused on building a great business. That's the point I'm trying to get across. The other thing that I like to tell people is the ultimate boss is the income statement. The income statement is a completely objective boss. If year over year over year you have the exact same revenue with the exact same profits, then you as a CEO are not delivering as a CEO. And even if the CEO is the owner, I want you to separate yourself out and think like the owner has hired the CEO to run the business and their job is to grow it. If they're not growing it, then let's find someone who can.
I totally see the value of yours too, because it's when you are just looking for the exit, it you could have sold Rise a lot sooner than $40 million if the exit was the only thing driving that decision. And I do think a lot of business owners younger business owners or ones that grow up in a startup culture, they are just like minimum viable product, 3 years, sell it and get out and move on to the next thing. But there is wisdom in saying, no, invest your life towards this thing. Keep digging in until you don't anymore. So, okay, awesome. Love it. Thank you so much for sharing that too. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, are you ready? Jump into the lightning round. All right. Very good. So first question is coffee or tea, and how do you like it prepared, John?
So I had a chai latte today, so I'm going to go with tea. But if you asked me yesterday, I had just a latte, so I would have gone with coffee.
Chai latte is my go-to, any coffee shop too. So nice. Um, Pie or cake, and do you have a favorite kind?
Chocolate cake, and not a big pie fan, so no, that's an easier one.
Okay. Chocolate cake and chocolate icing, like all the way through.
Yeah.
And then, all right. Very good. Do you what's your favorite holiday and why?
When you asked that question, it was funny. That was the one that stumped me the most. I'll go with Thanksgiving. I like all the food. I like the time with my family. So I'll go Thanksgiving.
Okay, good enough. I mean, that tends to be my most popular answer on this show, so I'll allow it. Do you consider yourself a morning person or a night person, and do you have a favorite routine you look forward to?
Uh, Definitely a morning person. It's funny. My wife is a night person, and she starts asking me to do all these things at nighttime, and I'm exhausted. And I don't think I really have that much of a routine. I would say I work from home. I come downstairs. I get my kids to school. Uh, I think I could envision what I'd want my morning routine to be, but it's not what I get.
You've shared a lot already on the show, but what is a common belief among entrepreneurs that you would wanna challenge?
I would say unrealistic revenue growth.
Okay.
So I'm in the budgeting and forecasting space. But what I find is that, the amount of times people plan for a number and actually hit that number is very low. And it's always because they're just way too optimistic about what they think they can do from a revenue standpoint.
Is that, do you go industry by industry on that? Are you looking at benchmarks again, or how do you get some realism built into that? Because we're entrepreneurs and we're optimists, so
What I generally look at is how many new clients do you win per month on average, and what's the average order value? And, like we're in January right now, like what's your pipeline look like? And what's your historic looks like? And how are you changing the math? Like if this is a real story, I know this is a lightning round, so I'll do it lightning fast. $12 million company. I don't remember the exact year, but it was a few years ago. We were doing their plan for the next year and had told them that they were going to do 9 million in revenue. And he didn't really like that answer. It was an $11 million company who wanted to do 12, and I told him he was going to do 9. And the challenge was he had 3 $1 million customers that he lost. And his pipeline in January was very thin. And his average order value in terms of customers he won was like $100,000 a year. And so he would have had to magically, instantaneously go from winning 2 clients a month to winning 7 clients a month at the same average order value. And so, um, you know, those are the things. It's not based on math, it's based on wishing. And when you look at the math, oftentimes it's just not a feasible goal to achieve. That doesn't mean you can't make investments that you change the math, but it's generally not an instantaneous thing. It's more of a ramp.
yeah, you need to see that proven out over the first year, 2, 3 years before you can yeah, that makes sense. What is one thing that you would want your successor to remember you for?
I would say mentorship and wisdom shared. And I would say, I'd probably say the other thing is always do the right thing. And, you know, I I deeply care about my clients. I deeply care about my employees. One of the things that I'm most proud of at Rise in the exit was how many careers I made for people. And I can't say I made, like we made for people by growing the business. And, I would want them to carry on that legacy. And I think the other thing is, um, if you think of a salesperson as the promise maker and the person who has to deliver for that person is the promise keeper, I really want the promise keeper to deliver a better experience than whatever the promise maker said. Just philosophically, building something special.
Where are you finding creativity right now?
I think creativity is everywhere, but to me, it's all on the innovation side. You know, what I'll have people do as an exercise is think about the solution you're really trying to solve. So in my case, I'm trying to help professional service companies increase cash, profit margin, and revenue growth. So I know the service group, or I know the customer, and I know what I'm trying to solve. And now I'm constantly just thinking about new things to offer or things that I'm already offering and making it better and better. And that's creative. That's fun for me.
Jon, what do you have coming up in the next year that's got you really excited?
So we have figured out a method for innovating at a much faster velocity than ever before. And so I'm envisioning a lot of new technology coming out at a much faster pace. We have the AI CFO Copilot coming out. It just went into beta this week, so that's about to get launched. We have a resource planning tool coming out. We have a whole bunch of other products coming out. So I would say the speed of our innovation is what excites me the most.
Awesome. Well, this is your opportunity, Jon. Where can people go find out more about you and everything that you're doing?
So 3 different ways. The first is you can go to fiscaladvocate.com. We have a great resource section. You can go to LinkedIn and connect with me or follow me. I post every week at a LinkedIn. And then shoot me an email, jon@fiscaladvocate.com. I'd love to hear from you.
Very good. Well, Jon, I want to thank you for coming on The Art of Succession. This has been a great conversation. Gained a lot from your wisdom just growing and scaling businesses and how you help your own clients do the same. So thank you so much for being on here.
Barrett, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
I hope that you've enjoyed my conversation with Jon Morris as much as I have. Here on the Art of Succession podcast, we have interviews with business owners with their own succession stories twice a month. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, you can find the link for that down in the description below. If you enjoyed that episode, I ask that you please share it with somebody else, and you'll probably like this episode next. And I want to thank you for watching The Art of Succession.